Right, let's be brutally honest with each other for a moment. Are you, like me, starting to notice that something feels distinctly off? It's a peculiar sensation, a nagging little itch at the back of your mind, the kind you get when a politician promises something genuinely sensible but does just the opposite, that create CCO₂ for launch, break disaster for dinner, and breaking news for breakfast. Yo, I am Dr. Cool. Welcome back to my channel where we peel off the lies and unclad the raw truth as it is unapologetically. For years we've been subjected to a relentless, almost fanatical crusade to pry our beloved internal combustion engines from our grasp. They've told us our V80s are villains, our diesels are demons, and our only salvation lies in silent, soulless electric appliances on wheels. The pressure has been immense, a full-blown assault on everything that makes driving an experience rather than just a commute. But just as the noose tightens, a rather curious pattern is emerging, isn't it? Suddenly, almost as if by magic, a whole host of alternative fuel sources are bursting forth from the shadows, each one more fantastical than the last. It's like a magician pulling an endless stream of rabbits from a hat you didn't even know was there. First it was hydrogen, touted as the clean dream, though with a few explosive caveats. Then came the whispers of ammonia, a fuel apparently so potent it could power a small moon or at least a very large lorry. And let's not forget the chaps who insist they can make your car run on good old-fashioned water. Yes, the stuff that comes out of your tap. These aren't just minor tweaks, these are revolutionary claims appearing with a timing that feels just a little too convenient, a little too staged for comfort. But hold on to your hats, because the latest entrant into this parade of miraculous power sources is the most audacious one yet, the one that truly makes you wonder if someone's been tampering with the drinking water in the science labs. They are now claiming, with an unnervingly straight face, that we can take carbon dioxide, yes, CO₂, the very gas that's been public enemy number one in the climate change saga, and transform it into perfectly usable fuel. The stuff we exhale, the emissions from our factories, the very essence of what we've been told is cooking the planet, could apparently now power your trusty motor. It's an idea so bold, so utterly counterintuitive, it's like being told that the solution to a hangover is another bottle of whiskey. So the big question, the one that hangs in the air like the smell of burnt clutch, is this: are we on the cusp of a genuine, game-changing breakthrough that could rewrite the future of energy and transportation as we know it? Is this the silver bullet we've all been hoping for, a way to keep our cherished engines thrumming while simultaneously cleaning up the atmosphere? Or, and you have to consider this, is it all just another elaborate smokescreen, a dazzling piece of technological theatre designed to distract us while the real agenda marches on unimpeded? Is this CO₂ to fuel dream a genuine future, or is it merely another clever, tantalizing facade to keep us from asking the really uncomfortable questions? It certainly warrants a closer look, doesn't it? Right then, let's get down to brass tacks out of the blue. From across the pond, naturally, a US-based company, anonymous for now, they've stepped forward with a rather bold claim. A claim so enormous it makes you choke on your tea. They say they've done it, solved the unsolvable, invented something truly biblical, or so they'd have us believe. But what is this miracle they're touting? Is it another perpetual motion machine, or something more tangible? This needs a proper look, a skeptical eye. They claim they've built a machine, a special one, not just any old bit of engineering wizardry. This contraption, they say, does the impossible. It pulls carbon dioxide straight from thin air. Yes, you heard that correctly. Thin air, the very stuff that surrounds us, the air we breathe, the CO₂ that the plants supposedly crave, or the CO₂ that's meant to be boiling us all alive. It snatches it, captures it. Ingenious or utterly mad? One has to wonder about the scale of such a thing. And it's not just any CO₂ they're after. It's the same CO₂ we exhale with every breath. The CO₂ from your Sunday roast, your dog's panting. The gas blamed for every flood and heat wave, that very same carbon dioxide, the villain of the piece. They take this gas, this invisible menace, and then the magic really begins. Or the trickery, they transform it through some secret alchemy, a process shrouded in patents and promises. Into what, you ask? What is this grand transformation? They turn it into synthetic fuel. That's the punchline. Fuel that can power your car, your trusty runabout. Not some fancy space-age electric pod, but your current petrol guzzler, your diesel workhorse. Imagine that for a moment. Air into petrol. It sounds like something from a dusty science fiction novel, the kind of thing a mad professor scribbles on a napkin. But they insist it's real. Ready for the road? Are they pulling our leg, or are we on the verge of a revolution? Now, this synthetic fuel they're talking about, they're not shy with their promises, not one bit. They claim it's a zero-emission alternative. Zero emission. Let those words sink in. The holy grail for every green campaigner, the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card for motorists. But can it really be that simple, that clean? It sounds far too good to be true, doesn't it? Like finding a politician who actually keeps their word. There's always a catch, there has to be. And here's the real kicker, the part that grabs you. This miracle fuel, they say, works in your existing car, your old Ford Cortina, your beloved Land Rover. No need for any expensive EV conversion. Forget that. No need to rip out the engine, the heart of the car. You just fill up the tank, as you've always done. Turn the key, and off you go. Business as usual. Except the planet supposedly thanks you for it. It's a seductive idea, almost dangerously so. Too easy, too convenient, suspiciously so. Think about it. No new, complicated technology in your car. No wrestling with charging cables every night. No worrying about where the next charging station might be, or if it will even be working when you get there. And absolutely no eye-wateringly expensive batteries. Those massive, heavy lumps of lithium and cobalt. The ones that cost a king's ransom to replace. The ones mined in questionable conditions. None of that headache, none of that baggage. Just your car, as it is. But suddenly... green? So what's the deal? Just clean, direct power, fuel from the air, straight into your tank. No environmental guilt, no performance anxiety. The freedom of the open road restored. It's the dream scenario for every petrol head. A way to keep our engines roaring defiantly, but without choking the life out of Mother Earth. Or so the story goes, so the company claims. Is this the future we were promised, or a clever illusion? The questions, they just keep on piling up. They're not just calling it a neat trick, mind you. This isn't some minor improvement, some small tweak. The company behind this atmospheric fuel, they call it a game changer, a total revolution for the entire energy sector, the whole shebang. And not just energy, for the climate too, the two biggest, thorniest problems facing humanity. Solved, just like that, with one clever machine. It's a claim of monumental proportions, almost arrogant. Can one invention really carry that much weight? Imagine for a moment if they're actually right, if this technology is real and scalable. The implications are staggering, truly mind-boggling. It would rewrite the rules of the game entirely. Our reliance on digging up ancient fossilized carbon gone, the geopolitical turmoil over oil reserves, a thing of the past. The endless arguments about carbon taxes and offsets, moot. It would be like discovering fire all over again. A fundamental shift in how we power our world. But if is a very big word, isn't it? Could this be the silver bullet we've all been searching for? The one that allows us to have our cake and eat it too, to keep our modern lifestyles, our mobility, our industries, while simultaneously healing the planet, cleaning the air, turning our biggest liability, CO₂, into our greatest asset. It sounds like a utopian fantasy, a flight of fancy, but what if it's not? What if it's within our grasp? The sheer potential is enough to make your head spin. It could redefine progress for the 21st century, or it could be the biggest letdown in history. But before we all rush out and buy shares, before we declare the climate crisis over it, we have to pause, we have to think. Is this a genuine breakthrough, a beacon of hope, or is it perhaps something else entirely? Another elaborate distraction, a technological mirage, designed to keep us hopeful, to keep us compliant, while the real powers continue to pull the strings. It's a tantalizing prospect, this CO₂ fuel, but the smell of something fishy is hard to ignore. Alright, so they claim they can conjure fuel from thin air. Sounds like something Merlin would cook up after a few too many goblets of mead. But let's for a moment suspend our entirely justified disbelief. Let's peer into their cauldron, their high-tech distillery. What exactly are the ingredients in this supposed miracle brew? First up, the star of the show, carbon dioxide, CO₂. The gas we've been told is the arch-villain, the climate killer. They say their machines just suck it out of the atmosphere like a giant industrial vacuum cleaner, hoovering up our emissions. A rather convenient starting point, you have to admit, but CO₂ alone won't get your motor running, will it? It's rather inert stuff, like a politician's promise. You need something with a bit more oomph. Enter ingredient number 2, hydrogen, and not just any old hydrogen. Oh no, it has to be green hydrogen. Sounds terribly virtuous, doesn't it? This, they explain, is hydrogen created using renewable energy. Think vast arrays of solar panels basking in the desert sun, or colossal wind turbines slicing through the air like giant propellers. All that lovely, clean energy used to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, so far so ecologically sound, almost disappointingly sensible in a way. So now we have our two main components, carbon dioxide, plucked from the sky, the villain reformed, and green hydrogen, born from sunshine and breezes, the eco-warrior. It's like a planetary peace treaty being brokered in a laboratory. The next step, presumably, is to introduce them to each other, mix them together, a bit like making a cocktail, but instead of a refreshing gin and tonic, you get, well, what exactly? Is it as simple as stirring them with a large, carbon-neutral spoon? Somehow, I suspect there's a bit more to it than that. The devil, as they say, is always in the details, especially the scientific ones. This is where the real science bit is supposed to happen, the part where clever people in white coats wave their intellectual wands. They take this captured CO₂, this guilt-ridden gas, and they combine it with this specially produced, eco-friendly hydrogen. It's not just a casual mingling, it's a carefully orchestrated chemical dance, a reaction designed to transform these humble ingredients, to turn them from problematic pollutants and energetic gases into something far more useful, something that could allegedly power your car. The stage is set for the grand transformation, the chemical alchemy. But what is the secret process that makes this all possible? Now, this is where it gets properly interesting or utterly baffling. The boffins behind this atmospheric fuel, they have a name for their magic. They call it reverse combustion. Let that sink in for a moment. Reverse combustion. It sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? Like military intelligence or honest politician. Combustion, as any schoolboy with a box of matches knows, is about burning things. Fuel plus oxygen gives you fire, energy, and crucially, CO₂ and water. It's a one-way street, a process of release, of breaking things down. So how, in the name of all that's holy, do you reverse that? How do you unburn something that's already been thoroughly burnt? To understand their claim, we need a quick reminder of what normal combustion is. You put petrol in your car, it mixes with air, a spark ignites it. Bang! The hydrocarbons in the fuel react with oxygen. This reaction breaks them down, releasing energy that pushes the pistons. And what are the main byproducts? Carbon dioxide and water vapor. The very CO₂ they're now trying to hoover back up. It's a process of energy release, turning complex molecules into simpler ones. A fundamental chemical reaction that has powered our world for over a century. So, reverse combustion must mean forcing those simpler molecules back together. It means putting the genie back in the bottle, essentially. This is where the green hydrogen plays its crucial role, and all that renewable energy used to create it, they're essentially trying to force CO₂ and hydrogen to react, to build bigger, more complex molecules, synthetic hydrocarbons. It's like running the film of a burning log backwards. Instead of smoke and ash turning into wood, it's CO₂ and hydrogen turning into fuel. This requires a significant input of energy, of course. You can't make fuel without putting energy in. That would defy physics. That energy, they say, comes from the renewables used to make the hydrogen. So you're using clean energy to turn a waste product back into a resource. The result of this reverse combustion, this clever bit of chemical engineering, they create synthetic hydrocarbons. That's the technical term. Think of them as custom-built fuel molecules made to order, crafted from carbon, from the CO₂, and hydrogen, from the green hydrogen. These aren't some alien goo. They're designed to mimic the fuels we already use. Essentially, they are recreating the building blocks of petrol or diesel. But instead of drilling deep into the earth to find ancient deposits, they're manufacturing them in a reactor, using air and renewable power. It's a bold claim, making fuel from the very stuff our engines normally produce as waste. The question is, does this elegant theory translate into a practical reality? Watch this video clips from the manufacturers and others ABD. I will be back shortly. Now, if seeing believing, then it may be realistic. However, seeing is no more believing. Why? Watch my video about this is the end. Then you understand that seeing anything on screen can be made up in as much as it's coming from the Western world. Reality can be 0.001%. So after all this talk of capturing CO₂ and reverse combustion, what you're left with, according to these pioneers, is actual, usable liquid fuel. Not some strange experimental gas you need a special tank for. Not a battery pack that weighs more than a small car, but proper sloshing liquid fuel, the kind you can pour, the kind that smells, well, like fuel, familiar, reassuring even. This is a key part of their sales pitch, you see. No massive change for the end user, for you and me. Just carry on as normal, but with a cleaner conscience. Or so they would have us believe, with a confident smile. And here's the crucial bit. This synthetic man-made fuel. It apparently burns just like good old gasoline or diesel, because chemically speaking, it's very similar. The hydrocarbons they're creating are designed to be compatible with your existing car engine, your current infrastructure. No need to trade in your beloved motor for some soulless electric box. No need for expensive conversions or newfangled fuel pumps. You just fill up your tank, turn the key, and away you go. The promise is that it simply works, seamlessly replacing the stuff we get from oil wells without, and this is their big claim, extracting any new oil from the ground. This creates the tantalizing prospect of a closed-loop system. The CO₂ is captured from the atmosphere. It's then converted into fuel. This fuel is burned in your car, which, yes, releases CO₂ back into the atmosphere, but then that same CO₂ can, in theory, be captured again. And so the cycle continues. Round and round it goes, potentially making the entire process carbon neutral, or so the argument runs. It's not eliminating CO₂ emissions from the tailpipe directly, but it's using atmospheric CO₂ as a recyclable ingredient, a bit like recycling aluminium cans, but for the air we breathe. It's a neat idea, a tidy circle, but does it hold water in the real world? The translation they offer is straightforward. Liquid fuel from thin air. Fuel that works in your car, just like the stuff you buy now, but without the guilt of drilling, shipping, and refining crude oil. It sounds like the alchemist's dream finally come true, turning a base material unwanted CO₂ into liquid gold for our engines. But is this simple explanation a true reflection of the process? Or is it a carefully sanitized version, glossing over enormous complexities? The science, explained in these broad strokes, sounds almost plausible, but the real test is whether it can be done efficiently, affordably, and at scale. That, my friends, is an entirely different can of worms, isn't it? The sound of silence. Where's the media fanfare? Right, let's ponder this for a moment, shall we? If this CO₂ to fuel business is truly the revolutionary breakthrough it's cracked up to be, the silver bullet that solves our energy woes and saves the planet while letting us keep our proper cars, then one question screams louder than a Formula One engine at full chat. Why isn't it plastered across every single front page? Why isn't it leading every news bulletin? You'd expect it to be the story of the decade, perhaps the century, the kind of news that makes people stop in the street and stare at the headlines, but instead, we get an almost eerie silence, a profound and rather suspicious lack of trumpets and fanfare from the mainstream media. It's all a bit too quiet, isn't it? Almost unnervingly so. You would imagine, wouldn't you, that newsrooms across the land would be falling over themselves to report this. Banner headlines proclaiming the future is here, CO₂ converted to petrol, or climate crisis solved and you can keep your V8. It's the sort of uplifting, game-changing story that editors supposedly dream of. Yet what do we actually see? More dreary updates on interest rates, endless speculation about minor political reshuffles, or some Z-list celebrity's latest manufactured drama. Is it simply that good news doesn't sell newspapers or attract clicks anymore? Or, and this is a more unsettling thought, is there perhaps a quiet directive, a subtle memo circulating through the hallowed halls of journalism, suggesting this particular story is best left underreported? It makes you wonder who's curating the news we consume. Think about the sheer magnitude of this claim. A technology that could potentially render our dependence on fossil fuels obsolete, not by forcing us into tiny electric boxes, but by transforming the very air we breathe into usable fuel. This isn't just a quirky science story for the back pages. This is a fundamental shift in the global paradigm. It could impact geopolitics, economics, the environment, and our way of life. So why the apparent media apathy? Why the decided lack of investigative zeal, the absence of prime-time specials exploring its potential? Are they all too deeply invested in the narrative of electric salvation to consider an alternative? Or is someone somewhere with a vested interest in the status quo gently suggesting they look the other way? Frankly, this media reticence is either a colossal oversight or something far more calculated. Groundbreaking innovations, especially those that threaten to overturn established industries or political agendas, have an uncanny knack for being downplayed, dismissed, or simply ignored until they can no longer be denied. It's as if the story is too good, too disruptive, or perhaps too dangerously simple to be given the oxygen of publicity. Is this CO₂ fuel saga being quietly suffocated by a media machine that prefers more complex, more controlled narratives? The silence from those who are supposed to inform us is not just puzzling, it's bordering on the deafening, and it stinks more than a forgotten kipper in the glove box. All right, so the newspapers and television screens are largely silent on this CO₂ fuel revolution. But what about our esteemed leaders, the governments we elect, supposedly to steer the ship of state with wisdom and foresight, to embrace innovation that benefits us all? If a technology emerges that promises to turn a harmful greenhouse gas into clean fuel, effectively offering a get-out-of-jail-free card for our internal combustion engines and a lifeline for the environment, you'd think they'd be all over it. You'd expect them to be scrambling to understand it, to fund it, to fast-track its development, and to shout its praises from the dispatch box. Yet, once again, we're met with a rather conspicuous and deeply troubling lack of governmental enthusiasm or action. Where are the bold policy statements, the emergency budgets allocated to this miraculous technology? Where are the newly formed departments for atmospheric fuel realization? One might envision prime ministers and presidents elbowing each other aside for a photo opportunity beside a gleaming CO₂ to fuel reactor, proclaiming a new dawn for energy independence and environmental stewardship. We've cracked it, they'd beam. Green fuel for all, and you can keep driving your beloved Ford Capri. Instead, what do we get? More punitive taxes on motorists, ever-tightening emissions targets that seem designed to kill off petrol cars, and endless platitudes about building back greener with technologies that many people simply don't want or can't afford. Are they genuinely unaware? Or are they deliberately looking the other way? It's not as if these governments are hesitant to spend our money. Oh no, they're remarkably adept at spaffing billions up the wall on grandiose projects that often deliver very little, or on IT systems that wouldn't pass muster in a 1980s video game arcade. They pour fortunes into subsidies for technologies that have their own significant environmental and ethical question marks, not to mention the infrastructure challenges. So when a potential game changer like CO₂-derived fuel appears on the horizon, a solution that could theoretically integrate with our existing infrastructure and vehicles, their apparent inertia is more than just baffling. It's deeply suspicious. Unless, of course, this particular solution doesn't align with a predetermined agenda, an agenda that has already been set in stone, regardless of any inconvenient new discoveries. This lack of governmental urgency, this seeming indifference to a technology that could solve so many problems simultaneously, it makes you wonder. Could it be that embracing such a straightforward solution would involve admitting that their current, often costly and disruptive strategies are flawed? Or, to adopt a more cynical and perhaps realistic perspective, would championing CO₂ fuel upset the incredibly powerful and well-funded lobbying groups that currently hold sway in the corridors of power? The established energy giants or the burgeoning electric vehicle industry, for instance, they have a lot to lose if the rules of the game suddenly change. It does make one question whose interests our governments are truly serving, ours or those of the unseen players shaping policy behind closed doors. So, we have the media offering a collective shrug, and governments seemingly more interested in regulating us into electric buggies than exploring this CO₂ fuel phenomenon. What, then, is the real reason this potentially world-altering technology isn't already powering our lives? Is it simply a case of it being too expensive at this nascent stage? That's certainly a common hurdle for any new invention. One can imagine that the machinery required to suck significant quantities of CO₂ from the atmosphere and the energy-intensive process of creating green hydrogen might currently result in a fuel that costs considerably more per litre than a vintage Chateau Lafite. The economics have to make sense, after all. Innovation without affordability is merely an academic exercise. Alternatively, perhaps it's just too early in the development cycle. The science might be sound, the laboratory tests promising, but scaling it up to an industrial level, making it reliable and efficient enough to replace even a fraction of global oil consumption, that's a monumental undertaking. It could be that the technology is still in its infancy, the equivalent of the Wright brothers' first flyer. A magnificent achievement, certainly, but a long way from a Boeing 747. Perhaps it needs decades more research, billions more in investment before it's truly ready for prime time. This is a perfectly reasonable, if somewhat dull, explanation. It suggests patience is required rather than suspicion, but is it the complete picture, or is there something more deliberate at play here? This is where we venture into more controversial and frankly more interesting territory. Could it be that this CO₂ to fuel technology is being actively, if subtly, held back, suppressed even? It's a thought that sends a shiver down the spine, but it's not without precedent, or at least persistent rumour. History, and indeed internet forums, are rife with stories of revolutionary inventions. The engine that runs on water, the tyre that never wears out, the cure for the common cold developed by a lone genius, that threatened powerful vested interests and subsequently vanished into obscurity. Their creators often discredited or silenced. Are these just urban legends, or do they hint at a ruthless undercurrent where progress is only permitted if it profits the right people? Consider the colossal entities that stand to lose if CO₂ fuel becomes a viable reality. The global oil and gas industry, a multi-trillion-dollar behemoth, would see its primary asset, crude oil, dramatically devalued. They wouldn't exactly welcome a competitor that can literally make fuel from thin air, would they? And what about the burgeoning electric vehicle industry propped up by massive government subsidies and a carefully cultivated narrative of environmental salvation? They've invested fortunes in battery technology and charging infrastructure. The prospect of clean, carbon-neutral petrol that works in existing cars would be a catastrophic spanner in their meticulously planned works. Some insiders, speaking off the record, of course, suggest that the combined weight of these interests creates a formidable barrier to any technology that offers a different path. Could CO₂ fuel be a brilliant idea that's simply too inconvenient for the established order? Right then, let's address the enormous trumpeting elephant stomping about in the room, the one wearing a top hat made of £500 notes. Cost. Yes, the lovely grubby subject of money, because while conjuring fuel from thin air sounds absolutely spiffing, like something out of a particularly optimistic fairy tale, these grand technological pronouncements always, and I mean always, come with a rather hefty price tag attached. It's the unwritten rule of revolutionary inventions. The more revolutionary they sound, the more zeros you'll find on the invoice. So before we all start dreaming of guilt-free V8 motoring into the sunset, we need to have a serious chat about the financial realities, the cold, hard cash implications of this CO₂ alchemy. First up, that green hydrogen they keep mentioning. Sounds wonderfully virtuous, doesn't it? Like it's grown on trees by happy singing pixies. The reality, however, is a bit more industrial and a lot more expensive. Creating hydrogen by splitting water using renewable energy electrolysis, they call it, is currently a notoriously pricey affair. It requires vast amounts of clean electricity, which itself isn't free, and the electrolyzer units, the bits of kit that actually do the splitting, don't exactly grow on those pixie-tended trees either. So while the green part sounds lovely for the polar bears, the expensive part is rather less appealing for your wallet. This isn't some minor detail, it's a fundamental component, and its current cost is a major hurdle. Then there are the machines themselves, the magical contraptions designed to suck the dreaded CO₂ out of the atmosphere. These direct air capture, or DAC units, as the boffins call them, are not exactly something you can pick up at your local B&Q. They are complex, sophisticated pieces of engineering, requiring significant energy to operate, and, you guessed it, they cost a king's ransom to build and install. Imagine giant industrial-scale vacuum cleaners, but instead of dust bunnies, they're after individual CO₂ molecules, which are rather more elusive. The technology is undeniably clever, a testament to human ingenuity, but cheap, it most certainly is not by a long chalk. So, yes, the technology to create fuel from CO₂ is by all accounts real, it exists. People in white coats have demonstrated that it can be done, which is in itself quite remarkable. But being scientifically possible and being economically viable for mass consumption are two entirely different beasts, aren't they? It's like owning a Bugatti Veyron. It's a magnificent piece of engineering, but running it as your daily driver would bankrupt most nations. The big question, the one that keeps us grounded in a rather uncomfortable reality, is whether this CO₂ fuel can ever break free from the shackles of its own exorbitant production costs. Or is it destined to remain a fascinating but ultimately impractical curiosity for the super-rich eco-warrior? Now, let's assume for a moment, just for the sake of argument, that some benevolent billionaire or suddenly enlightened government decides to throw mountains of cash at this CO₂ fuel problem, making the initial costs slightly less eye-watering. The next enormous hurdle, one that makes the Grand National look like a gentle canter in the park, is scalability. It's all well and good producing a thimbleful of this miracle fuel in a pristine laboratory, enough to power a lawnmower for 10 minutes. But can you produce enough of it consistently and reliably to make even a tiny dent in the colossal global demand for transportation fuel? That, my friends, is a question of truly monumental proportions. Think about the sheer volume of petrol and diesel consumed every single day across the globe. We're talking millions upon millions of barrels. To replace even a fraction of that with synthetic fuel made from captured CO₂ and green hydrogen would require an industrial operation on a scale that is almost unimaginable. You'd need vast farms of renewable energy, solar panels stretching further than the eye can see, wind turbines carpeting entire landscapes just to produce the necessary green hydrogen, and then you'd need equally enormous factories filled with those CO₂ sucking machines and the reactors to perform the reverse combustion. It's not just a factory, it's a whole new global infrastructure. And what about the cost to you, the average punter, when you pull up to the pump? If this stuff costs an arm, a leg, and possibly a kidney just to produce, what's it going to retail for? Are we talking 20 quid a litre? 50? At what point does carbon-neutral gasoline become a ludicrously expensive indulgence for the eco-conscious elite, while the rest of us are still stuck choosing between heating and eating, let alone driving? The promise of keeping our existing cars is wonderfully seductive, but not if filling the tank requires taking out a second mortgage. The end price, the figure you see on the brightly lit sign at the forecourt, is what truly matters to most people. The dream is a seamless transition, isn't it? One day you're filling up with regular unleaded, the next you're filling up with this new clean air-derived fuel, and the only difference is a smug sense of environmental responsibility. But the journey from a brilliant idea to a widely available, affordable product is fraught with peril, especially when you're trying to compete with an established industry that has had a century to refine its processes and infrastructure. Is it truly feasible to scale this CO₂ fuel technology to a point where it makes a real difference without bankrupting us all in the process? Or is this grand vision simply too ambitious, too complex, too reliant on overcoming 1,000 daunting challenges? Now, before we all sink into a pit of cynical despair, convinced that CO₂ fuel is just another expensive pipe dream destined for the scrap heap of good intentions, let's consider a historical parallel. Think back, if you will, to the early days of solar panels. 20 or 30 years ago, solar power was the preserve of the wealthy enthusiast, the eco-eccentric with a large south-facing roof and an even larger bank balance. The panels themselves were clunky, terribly inefficient, and cost an absolute fortune. They were seen as a niche, almost novelty technology, certainly not a serious contender to power the nation's kettles, let alone its industries. Sound familiar at all? Back then, if you'd suggested that one day solar panels would be a common sight on rooftops across the land, that huge solar farms would be feeding significant amounts of electricity into the national grid, people would have laughed you out of the pub. They were too expensive, too inefficient, too reliant on that pesky thing called sunshine, which in Britain is often in rather short supply. Yet look what happened. Through relentless research and development, economies of scale in manufacturing, and yes, a healthy dose of government incentives, the cost of solar panels plummeted and their efficiency soared. What was once a rich man's toy became a genuinely viable energy source for the masses. So the $64,000 question is this: could CO₂-derived fuel follow a similar trajectory? Could the currently prohibitive costs of green hydrogen production and direct air capture tumble in the same way that solar panel prices did? Is it possible that, with sustained investment and technological breakthroughs, what seems impossibly expensive today could become surprisingly affordable tomorrow? It's a tantalizing prospect, a glimmer of hope that perhaps this isn't just another dead end. The history of technology is littered with examples of innovations that started out as costly and impractical, but eventually became mainstream game changers. The journey from a laboratory marvel to a household name often just takes time, money, and a stubborn refusal to give up. And it's rather large, but is this comparison truly valid, or is it just wishful thinking, a convenient narrative to keep the dream alive while other agendas are quietly pushed forward? Solar panels, for all their initial drawbacks, had a relatively straightforward path to wider adoption. CO₂ fuel, however, faces not only immense technical and economic challenges, but also the entrenched power of existing energy giants and the rapidly accelerating momentum of the electric vehicle movement. Could it be that this particular innovation, despite its potential, is simply arriving too late to the party or facing too many powerful opponents who would rather it remained a fascinating what-if scenario? The path ahead is anything but certain. That familiar feeling, haven't we been here before? Right, does any of this strike you as vaguely, unsettlingly familiar? This sudden, almost theatrical unveiling of a game-changing technology, just as the powers that be are trying to ram a less palatable solution down our collective throats. It's like watching a rerun of a particularly predictable soap opera where the long-lost twin always turns up just as the inheritance is about to be signed over. We're told the internal combustion engine is dead, a dinosaur, a relic of a dirtier age, and we must all embrace the silent hum of the electric motor. And then, just as we're reluctantly measuring up the garage for a charging point, a new contender appears promising to save our beloved petrolheads from extinction. It's almost too convenient, isn't it? This isn't the first time we've danced this particular jig, you know. Throughout history, or at least the bits of it they allow us to read, there have been whispers, rumors, and sometimes even outright demonstrations of technologies that could have changed everything. Engines that sip fuel like a hummingbird sips nectar. Materials that last forever. Energy sources that are practically free. They flare up briefly, like a rogue firework, illuminating the darkness with their dazzling potential. And then, just as quickly, they fizzle out. Sometimes they're dismissed as crackpot theories, other times they're deemed economically unviable, or they simply vanish without a trace, their inventors often following suit. It's a pattern, a rather disturbing one, if you care to look closely. So one has to ask, is this CO₂ to fuel revelation truly a spontaneous eruption of genius, a lucky break for mankind? Or is it merely the latest act in a long-running play, a carefully timed release of a technology that has perhaps been waiting in the wings for its cue? Could it be that these miracle solutions are dangled before us, not as genuine attempts to solve our problems, but as carefully managed distractions designed to keep us hopeful, to keep us believing that the system, for all its flaws, will eventually provide? It's a cynical thought, I grant you, but in a world where narratives are crafted with more care than a Savile Row suit, it's a thought worth entertaining. And if this is a pattern, what does it tell us about the CO₂ fuel story? Is it being allowed to surface now because the push for electric vehicles is meeting more resistance than anticipated, or perhaps to soften us up for some other, as yet unrevealed compromise? The timing, as they say, is everything. And the timing of these technological surprises often seems impeccably orchestrated, serving an agenda that isn't always immediately obvious to us mere mortals. It's enough to make you wonder if the future is less about discovery and more about a carefully curated reveal. If we accept, even for a moment, that the unveiling of new technologies isn't always a purely organic process driven by the noble pursuit of knowledge, then the next rather unsettling question is, who precisely is controlling the timeline of innovation? Who gets to decide which inventions see the light of day, and crucially, they see it? It's like an orchestra with countless brilliant musicians, each capable of playing a symphony of progress. But who is the conductor? Who is choosing the score, dictating the tempo, and deciding which instruments get a solo and which ones remain silent in the pit? It's a rather chilling thought that our technological destiny might not be in our own hands. The motives for such control could be manifold, couldn't they? Imagine you've invested billions, perhaps trillions, in a particular technological path, say, electric vehicles and the vast infrastructure they require. You wouldn't be terribly keen on a new invention suddenly appearing that makes your massive investment look a bit, well, premature or even foolish, so you might just lean on a few people, pull a few strings, ensure that any disruptive alternatives are kept on a very short leash, perhaps released slowly or only when it suits your long-term financial strategy. It's not necessarily about outright suppression, sometimes it's about managing the pace, ensuring an orderly transition that primarily benefits those already at the top of the food chain. And who are these shadowy conductors, these puppet masters of progress? Are we talking about the usual suspects? The colossal multinational corporations with balance sheets larger than small countries? The oil giants, the automotive behemoths, the tech titans? Or perhaps it's the international banking cartels, the globalist organizations with their grand visions for humanity, visions that may not always align with individual freedom or choice. Even governments with their own complex geopolitical and economic agendas might have a vested interest in steering innovation in a particular direction, favoring technologies that enhance control or serve specific national interests, rather than those that offer the greatest benefit to the common man. Ultimately, controlling the timeline of innovation is about controlling the future. It's about power. By managing when and how new technologies emerge, these unseen forces can shape markets, influence public opinion, and maintain their dominance. They can create a perpetual cycle of dependency, where we are always waiting for the next approved solution, rather than exploring alternatives that might genuinely empower us or disrupt their carefully laid plans. It's a subtle form of control, perhaps, but an incredibly effective one. And it makes you look at every breakthrough with a slightly more jaundiced eye, doesn't it? This then leads us to an even more disturbing contemplation. If technologies like CO₂-derived fuel can be conveniently discovered or brought to the fore at strategically opportune moments, what else might be lurking in the archives? What other game-changing, world-altering inventions might have been developed years, even decades ago, only to be quietly shelved, gathering dust in some forgotten laboratory or locked away in a patent office vault? It's an unsettling thought, the idea of a hidden reservoir of progress, a treasure trove of solutions deliberately kept from humanity simply because their release was deemed inconvenient, or perhaps unprofitable for the gatekeepers. Why would anyone in their right mind shelve a miracle? The reasons are as old as greed and power themselves. An invention that offers truly cheap, clean and abundant energy, for example, would be catastrophic for existing energy empires built on scarcity and control. A medical breakthrough that genuinely cures a common ailment rather than just managing its symptoms could decimate the profits of pharmaceutical giants. Technologies that promote genuine decentralization and individual autonomy would be anathema to those who seek to centralize power and monitor our every move. So these inconvenient truths, these brilliant sparks of genius, are sometimes extinguished before they can ignite a revolution that threatens the established order. Think about it in the context of this CO₂ fuel. If the science is as straightforward as they now suggest, CO₂ plus green hydrogen equals synthetic fuel, why wasn't this being aggressively pursued 20, 30 or even 40 years ago when the first serious warnings about climate change and carbon emissions were being sounded? Were the fundamental scientific principles unknown then? Unlikely. Or was it simply that the incentive to develop such a technology, one that could have prolonged the life of the internal combustion engine in a cleaner form, wasn't there? Perhaps because other, more profitable or more controllable avenues were already being mapped out by those who chart our course. This pattern of delayed or suppressed innovation, if it is indeed a reality, paints a rather bleak picture. It suggests that the progress we experience is not a natural, unhindered flowering of human ingenuity, but a carefully managed, often restricted flow. It means that solutions to some of our most pressing problems might already exist, held back not by technical impossibility, but by human design. And the story of CO₂ fuel, whether it proves to be a genuine savior or another fleeting promise, might just be one more chapter in this long and often hidden history of controlled innovation, leaving us to wonder what other marvels remain locked away, waiting for their right moment, a moment decided by someone other than us. So, there you have it, carbon dioxide, the stuff we breathe out, potentially powering the car you already own. Your beloved motor, it sounds like the perfect answer, doesn't it? Almost too perfect. A genuine way to keep our engines roaring, guilt-free, cleaning the air while we thunder down the motorway. If this Prometheus fuels and their ilk are truly onto something big, then the future of driving might not be silent and battery-powered after all. It could be loud, proud, and surprisingly clean. What a thought. But that, if is a big, greasy spanner in the works, isn't it? A monumental question mark hanging over everything because, let's be brutally honest, this whole CO₂ to fuel narrative, it could just as easily be another elaborate distraction, a clever feint, something to keep us hopeful, to keep us from asking harder questions, while the agenda, the one they don't want us scrutinizing, marches steadily onwards, quiet and relentless in the background. Is this technology a genuine lifeline for the internal combustion engine? Or is it simply a convenient smokescreen deployed at a crucial moment? A way to make us think the game isn't rigged? One has to wonder who truly benefits from these perfectly timed revelations. The silence from the mainstream, the inertia from governments, it all feels off. And that, my friends, brings us neatly to the next rather thorny subject, the relentless, almost fanatical push for electric vehicles. We're told it's all for the good of the planet, of course, noble intentions, but who is behind this electric dream? What's their true motive? Is it genuinely about saving the polar bears and cleaning up our cities? Or is there something else at play? Something about control. Something about centralization, tracking, and a future where your mobility is a subscription. These are the questions that need asking loudly and repeatedly, because the shiny, silent promise of EVs might be hiding a much darker reality. One they are desperate for you not to uncover. This CO₂ fuel story, whether it changes everything or absolutely nothing. It's a stark reminder that the battle for the future of energy, of transport, of our very freedom to move, is far from over. It's just getting started. The narrative they feed us is rarely the whole story. Often it's not even close. So stay curious, stay skeptical, and don't believe everything you're told, because the truth about what powers our world and who pulls the strings, well, that's a revelation they certainly don't want you to know, but we're going to look into it. Oh yes, the electric vehicle agenda, it's next on the block.